Republicans. Congressman Wenstrup, welcome back to the studio. And it just is too bad that we don't have anything at all to talk about. Is your mic on? Is that one working, Joe? Okay, because I don't hear him at all in my head. So I just
Am I on?
There you hear. I hear you now. Yeah, great. All right. So without further ado, I know he's out. We're talking about Lieutenant Colonel Scheller. So we have been engaging in a conversation about what the propriety of having him locked up. And the point has been, we know, and everybody in the listening audience understands, the military chain of command. We were just talking about this before the break. And that, no, you're not allowed to disrespect or, go against the orders of your senior officers. Certainly not go to the media and criticize about the military. And we all understand the motivations are there. They're sound and they're pure. And it's already on paper in the Military Code of Justice that you don't do that. Scheller did it. He went out and criticized because of the deaths of the 13 Americans and this botched Afghanistan withdrawal, which I think we can all collectively agree was just a Charlie Foxtrot, like most of us have never seen before. But that's a different story. But he was obviously critical of it. But he knew going in he was going to get in trouble. And he said it in his opening statements, basically. I'm going to be relieved of my chain of command. I'm going to be relieved of my command, blah, 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 blah. He knows what the rules are, but he did it anyway. He didn't commit any acts of violence. Was there anything that justified locking him up? Because they didn't lock him up right away.
Right.
They locked him up later because they say he violated a gag order. So how, in your mind, recognizing you served in America as military, thank you for your service, sir, where does this play out? Was it justified under any reason to lock him up? Can he say what's on his mind now, even though he's been relieved of command? What's your basic understanding of this?
Well, so I made the effort, and this is going back late September, or after it happened, and wanted to know. And acting as a congressman on behalf of one of my constituents, or at least his parents as well, but engaging also with members that represent Camp Lejeune. I thought that would be appropriate if we kind of teamed up to do that. And, so I got a response that we're just able to lay out the ground rules, and this is coming from the legal side of the Marine Corps.
Right.
All right. And but without going into a very detailed brief of his particular case, which they said they would need to prepare that, but let me at least tell you today what the rules say, and I'll share that with you. A commander has probable cause to order pretrial confinement when there is a reasonable belief that, one, an offense triable by court-martial has been committed. Two, the person confined committed it, which I don't necessarily understand that one until you've had your trial.
It's guilty.
That's guilty.
Before,
yes.
Before proof of guilt.
Although, in this case, someone said I did this.
I think we have an admission of guilt on this.
So, three, confinement is required by the circumstances. So, by that, I think what they mean is people are threatening him or something like that.
For his own personal protection?
Yeah.
Is he a flight risk? I mean, that also, I suppose, could be in there.
Right.
And they could take away his passport and he wouldn't be a flight risk.
And this isn't necessarily his case, but they're just saying these are the circumstances, right? And within 48 hours of the imposition of confinement, a neutral and detached officer will review the adequacy of the probable cause to continue pretrial confinement. If the continued pretrial confinement is approved, the commander shall prepare a written memorandum within 72 hours of the imposition of pretrial confinement stating the reasons why the requirements for the pretrial confinement have been met. So I believe that was supposed to happen on September 30th at 3:30 in the afternoon. That was closed.
The press wanted in. Right. They said no press.
Correct.
Press went to court, said, hey, you got to let us in. They wanted an injunction, an affirmative injunction to order the court to let them participate or at least be present at the hearing. And so rather than go to court and fight that, they let him out.
I don't know that.
That's what I read this morning. That was my understanding.
You're a little more versed on that than I am. I didn't know if. Well, here was my take. I don't know if that they actually, because it was delayed till Tuesday, right? And that was yesterday. So I didn't know if they had that and the decision was made that you can't. But
It was yesterday. Here's a statement. Yeah. An IRO hearing was scheduled to review Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller's pretrial detention at 1:30 p.m. today being yesterday. The Marine Corps refused to provide, this according to a statement from Newsmax, this is their summary. The Marine Corps refused to provide an open hearing or to record the hearing. I find that unusual. It's like they want to bury the whole notion of what went on within the hearing. Media outlets objected and asked that the hearing be delayed to allow action in federal court. That's where I read in that the media said, hey, freedom of press, we have right to access. And then prior to the hearing, the Marine Corps agreed to release him pending trial by court-martial. According to, let's see here, who issued this statement. Lieutenant Colonel Scheller remains subject to the unlawful gag order. This was his lawyer talking about the unlawful gag order. That was apparently the reason they locked him up, because he made the first statement, and he obviously knew he was going to be relieved of his command, and he kept making statements and being critical. Then they said, you violated the gag order, and that's why they threw him in the brig.
I believe that
yesterday they let him out because they were facing a federal court hearing about media access. Now, I guess the broader question is, were they afraid that the media would report what was going on and let those details out? They didn't want that to happen. It was better for them to let him out. Or did they just not want to fight that court battle? Or did they realize they didn't have enough, legitimate reason to hold him in, and that was going to be the ultimate result? He'd be let out and they'd get embarrassed. So bottom line is, he's out.
Yeah, and I followed up with a letter to the Secretary of Navy, and I think you were even talking about it earlier with one of your listeners. And, we're asking other questions I have not gotten answers to. And again, this is signed by me and two of the members that represent Camp Lejeune in that area. And, we're just asking, have charges been preferred? What are those charges? What articles of the UCMJ is he accused of violating? What's the justification for the pretrial confinement? All those questions that you're asking really as well, and a few others. And we asked to clarify the schedule of what lies ahead. So we haven't gotten those answers yet, and maybe they don't know what the schedule looks like.
Or maybe they just don't feel like responding to their elected officials.
Yeah. What I hope for today, for this very day, is that Lieutenant Colonel Scheller is having an opportunity to be with his wife and kids and parents and take a deep breath.
If you lock me up and I was deprived of my liberty and freedom, which is, that's a horror show from my standpoint, that's what I would want to do. I wouldn't have the radio or television on. I'd be hanging out with my wife, and after we were done hanging out, then I might want to hang out with the kids some too, but you get the idea. So
yeah, I hope they have a peaceful day.
I do too. Well, on that, we'll pause. We'll take a break, and we'll come back, and we'll talk about trillions in spending and maybe the $1 trillion platinum coin minted out of nowhere, whole cloth. Guess what? We have a new $1 trillion. Crazy stuff going on, and the efforts by the left to really silence everyone across the board on all kinds of levels. We'll get Congressman Wenstrup's reaction to the Department of Justice asking for federal assistance related to school board meetings. Brian Thomas here with Congressman Brad Wenstrup in studio. Going to move away from Lieutenant Stuart Scheller and dive on into infrastructure, which the devil's always in the details. And Congressman, I know you've got lots of thoughts on this, but my initial approach to this has been lately to remind people that it really has nothing to do with the actual number that's on it. Although we are perilously in debt and we don't pay for what we've already bid off. It's more what's in it. Everyone likes infrastructure, and we can agree that it is one of the core functions of government. You don't get an interstate highway system if it's up to the individual states to have to create it. It requires so much cooperation. So, this is a project the federal government can deliver on, and it's going to provide a return on investment. Every off-ramp is going to be an opportunity for business to flourish. Makes sense. Infrastructure universally embraced by both parties. Correct. I know some of my hardcore big L libertarian friends may differ with me on that one, but I'm going to go that far, right? So if you call it infrastructure, people are like, yeah. And if you get 13 senators to pass it, it's bipartisan infrastructure. So what's the problem here? There's a lot more in there than infrastructure. As it currently sits at 1.2 or 3 trillion, Congressman Wenstrup, would you vote for it?
No. And let me tell you why. I mean, as you said, I'm for infrastructure. You know, we need our economy to be strong for us to be the capitalist-free society that we have. And infrastructure is a key part of that. And any business will tell you that. And, you know, you talk about the importance of this bridge we have that crosses the Ohio River. And it is important. I-75 runs from northern Michigan down to the Keys.
1/5 of the nation's gross domestic product right there on that road.
You took the words out of my mouth.
Sorry.
That's okay.
This tend to do that.
Good conversation here. Anyway, but, you know, go back to the beginning of the conversations with this administration on infrastructure. Kevin McCarthy, Republican leader in the House, goes to the White House, and Joe Biden's first comment is, how much are you willing to spend? And Kevin McCarthy says, well, don't you think we should be defining what infrastructure is first? Right. I mean, you know, the Democrats were saying, you know, child care is infrastructure. Everything's infrastructure. Right. I mean, they would just be willing to throw anything in there and call it infrastructure. But the Democrats more operate on let's throw out a big number and then work backwards.
Right.
And McCarthy's like, let's define infrastructure and look at our greatest needs and then figure out how we get there, which is a logical business-like approach to the nation's concerns. So with the bill that is out there, you know, first of all, there was zero input from House members.
I don't know how that actually happens, but I know it did.
Well, because it comes from the White House, and then Democrats are in charge, and so they say this is the bill.
Yeah, it's been handed down from on high.
Yeah, we didn't debate what infrastructure was in committee.
I know.
You know, we didn't have these conversations of, you know, what our highest priorities are and this and that. We've weighed in on some of that when it comes to appropriations, but that's really been about it. And, you know, with this, it's staggering new spending, which is unpaid for. And again, you're talking about inflation. And I think, you know, blue collar workers, they're feeling the inflation now, and they're seeing it.
Yeah.
And they understand. I had a guy, Brian, say to me, yeah, I got my $300 check because I have one child. He's a lineman for a rural electric company, right? He said, I'd really much rather be able to afford a steak for my family sometime and afford to fill up my gas tank and things like that. So this is this bill, as it is, has a multi-billion-dollar funding shortfall. So half of the 1.2 trillion is new spending, and 400 billion of that is unpaid for. That's 25% of the price tag. So what is that? Just addition to the debt. And this thing, it overfunds transportation modes that Americans aren't using.
Yeah, like rail. $80 billion for rail? Isn't that what I read?
Well, $66 billion for passenger rail. For passenger rail, which means Amtrak, basically, right?
Yeah, and we all use Amtrak around here. You stand down at Union Terminal at midnight waiting for your train to show up. Probably won't show up until about 4 hours late, and then you get on it. How many people are doing that, Congressman? Really?
I don't know. I mean, I like the concept. I think it's kind of cool to take.
It's quaint, and we can wax poetic and nostalgic about cool old rail travel and your sleeper car, but nobody's doing it.
Right. That's the problem. So, you know, is this a museum you're trying to hold up or something? I don't know, but. And it includes no reforms to some of the outdated processes that have been in place. Anyway, there's been 6-year delays on major projects that we have approved, and so and that costs us, right? So whenever there's a delay, it costs more and more and more.
Oh yeah, missed opportunity. The materials cost has already gone through the roof as a consequence of COVID and the supply chain backups. That project you just talked about from 6 years ago is probably like double the price now for having waited.
Right. And so we put in some cost-cutting proposals, and they were ignored.
Of course.
And that's been the standard through this. So it really paves the path for what we estimate to be $3.5 trillion tax and spending spree. I mean, now we can get into the dangers of new taxes. Keep in mind, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act increased revenues to the government.
All right, when we come back, I want to ask you I have to get this question answered because I was a bit confused with Congressman Shabbat yesterday about the status of the giant $3.5 trillion social transformation bill and what we will loosely call the infrastructure bill, and how they are joined at the hip or aren't they? Are they going to be separately voted on, independent or not? Let's talk about that. We come back along with a whole lot more with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Point of clarification, and again, I got a little confused yesterday when I was talking to Congressman Steve Chabot about this infrastructure bill versus the giant 3.5 however trillion monstrosity. The Democrats wrangling over which would come first. Pelosi made some promises that they would vote on infrastructure first. Those days came and went. I understand the moderates were upset about that, but I always thought the strategy was that the progressive wing of the Democrat Party was demanding that they get their vote first on the giant multi-trillion-dollar package, and that they would vote no on infrastructure if it came up first, just to deny them that, just to assure that they had that win. They want it voted on. My belief was that the reason the moderates wanted the infrastructure bill voted on first was because that's assured of passage. Because like we said before, notwithstanding what's in it, it's infrastructure, and it's already gone through the Senate, and it's going to pass for sure. It's bipartisan. If they got that through, then they were free, the moderate ones, the sort of swing state Democrats, they would be free to vote no on the monstrosity package, and it would get shot down, notwithstanding the problems they face in the Senate. But I got the impression from Chabot that somehow they were both going to pass. It was going to be, if it was one, it's going to be both. I don't understand.
Well, essentially, there are several of the moderates who are willing to vote for the reconciliation package. Okay. But they want theirs first. And they're saying they won't vote for the reconciliation package until they get the infrastructure bill that they want. So I'm glad I'm not in this circular firing squad over on the Democrat side right now by any means. But Pelosi's stuck in the middle. They're all shooting at each other. Okay?
Sure they are.
And so, yeah, I mean, I would say this, there's only a few real blue dog Democrats. And I mean, very few. But the margins are so slim. If she loses a handful of them, and you can keep the Republicans collectively together, and Steve Chabot didn't know if there was a possibility on that, which just blew my mind. Like, are you serious? There are a bunch of Republicans out there that might go for either one of these? There are some Republicans that would vote for the infrastructure bill. They haven't read it then. Maybe they have, but maybe they're hearing from their constituents very loudly. All right. So every district is different. Brian. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, Congressman. Yeah. It doesn't mean there's a whole lot of them out there. Yeah. It just means they're loud. Yeah. Well, often. So anyway, besides that point, what's going on is, really the mindset in our mind is, if this infrastructure bill gets passed, they will pass the reconciliation bill. They'll have the votes for that. Seriously? Yes. So that's why we say, if a vote for the infrastructure bill is really not voting for a $1.2 trillion bill, which isn't even all paid for. Right. But you're really voting for over $5 trillion. And on their other wish list bill, what we've been referring to as the $3.5 trillion bill, they actually marked it up in several committees to 4.3. And it's actually more than that. So, I mean, the spending has no limit to them whatsoever. Well, and then again, like the infrastructure bill, the focus has been on the dollar number. Joe Manchin, for whatever reason, and, I applaud him for at least standing up against $3.5 trillion, but $1.5 trillion, I can go 1.5. For what? It's what's in it that's the problem. Right. And they can hone it down to $1 trillion and make these programs last 1 year within them. And then that way the CBO scores it. Oh, my God, it's only $1 trillion. And they can say, see, we pared it down. But they get what they want by way of enacting a law that allows more social control from the federal government, which creates new entitlements with the notion that because we, the American public, are so blank and stupid that once we get some big fat benefit from government, paid for or not, we don't want to relinquish it. That's exactly right. You nailed it. So you pass something. Everyone's just talking about the number. You got to look at the policy. And increasing our taxes right now is the worst thing that we can be doing on a lot of reasons, and we can talk about that. But they put these things in, and they put them in as temporary, and as Ronald Reagan says, once they're in, they don't go away. Right. And that's the closest thing to eternity is a government program. It's because we demand that they're kept. And then that becomes a political point.
Right. Third rail politics, right? You can't touch that.
And this is filled with that. So they say it doesn't cost much because it's short term, but it becomes long term. And everyone knows that. So, this is why we say if a vote for one is a vote for both. But they are to be held separately. But does that make sense to you now?
It does, but it disturbs me to no end to hear how conclusive you are that to pass the infrastructure bill means that the crazy bill, which, God, parsing these out, the social bill, the larger of the two, will pass
in the House.
I know, but I know we're not at the Senate yet. But that bothers me, that there's that many Democrats who are willing to just throw away all semblance of moderation, all semblance of logic and reason, and embrace and vote for something that expands so much the government's control over our lives, is so invasive and intrusive into our personal rights, is so violative of the Fourth Amendment. I think of that IRS provision in there to allow them to see any transaction over $600 from every individual's bank account. That kind of crap, that any Democrat or anybody that would capitulate to that for the sake of passing something. That's what bothers me about this conversation, that you are so convinced that passing the infrastructure bill will result in a majority vote in the House for that other crazy crap. 7:36, we'll continue with Congressman Brad Wenstrup, spending a whole hour trying to solve the problems of the world. We'll be talking to Sherry Poland from the Board of Elections at the top of the hour about poll workers, and Judge Anna Napolitano on the history of the law of personal privacy and bodily integrity, among others. In the meantime, let us talk about the debt ceiling. Now, Joe Biden gave it away the other day, and there's a good op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal on this one. They can pass a debt ceiling increase on their own. This is Mitch McConnell's point. But they have to do it through a reconciliation process because it otherwise would be subject to the 60-vote requirement in the Senate. Now, there's two ways to go about this. They could change the Senate rules to make it like get rid of the filibuster completely. There's been a lot of threats of that. We know about that. Or they could get rid of the filibuster just for the debt ceiling. That's an option. They could do
like they did with judges.
Exactly, yeah. They could also do a reconciliation process, and that's what McConnell's saying. But to do that, it opens up the door for Republicans to offer amendments that the Democrats would have to go on record as voting yes or no on. And Biden even said this yesterday. There is a process that would require literally up to hundreds of votes. It's unlimited number of votes having nothing directly to do with the debt limit. It could be everything from Ethiopia to anything else that has nothing to do with the debt limit. And it's fraught with all kinds of potential danger for a miscalculation, and it would have to happen twice. His point being, Republicans are going to put up some simple, hard amendments to Democrats are going to be put in a terrible position if they vote no on them. Oh, campaign fodder, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny you brought that up because there was an amendment that I offered in Ways and Means on the social spending bill, and one of the Democrats said, "Oh, this is just one of those gotcha amendments." And I said, "No, it's real. It's a real amendment, and we mean it. But at the same time, you voted against it. I guess we got you." And that's exactly what they're afraid of with this. So McConnell, I give him credit, man. He's saying we're going to hold the line on this. They can do this on their own. They have a couple avenues to increase the debt ceiling. But the worst part about what they want to do with the debt ceiling is they want it to be a blank check. They don't want to put a limit on it. They don't want to just pay our current bills that we have. They want to leave that checkbook open as though it's very well funded, for one thing. They want to leave that checkbook open really through the term almost. So,
well, I mean, we've been through debt ceiling fights now. I don't know how many times in my lifetime alone. It doesn't mean anything. No one has any fiscal restraint in Congress anymore. Look, we went through 4 years of the Trump administration, 4 years of the Trump administration, half of which the Republicans controlled the House and Senate. What happened? Did we exercise fiscal restraint? No, not a bit of it.
It's been both sides of the aisle. Now, I will tell you that when we did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which they say cost the government, it didn't. More people went to work than ever before, and revenues to the government increased.
Went up.
But we kept the spend, like mandatory spending is the bottom line. We got to address that because those are things that go out the door. We don't even debate those anymore.
Right.
Remember? And
entitlements.
That's like 70% of what we spend.
And this new stuff is
reviewing.
more of that. That's the problem with this $3.5 trillion bill. It creates more of those social welfare entitlements that people get so used to. Oh my God, I get $30 a month for my cell phone bill? Cool.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're exactly right. So we'll see how that plays out. But, another sticking point the Democrats are having is you have some that say they will not vote for a bill if it includes the Hyde Amendment, which prevents federal dollars going to fund abortion. And Joe Manchin said he won't support any spending bill that doesn't include the Hyde Amendment. So they've got a lot of bickering going on that. I wish we made the Hyde Amendment permanent and took it off the table and and go from there. But that's another story. So they're fighting like cats and dogs. We spent all last week, Brian, sitting there that we were supposed to vote on infrastructure on Monday. Then it was supposed to be Thursday, and then it was Friday, and then they said just go home and
Halloween now, Congressman, seems appropriate. It'll be voted on Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't go away. One more with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Since we have 9,000 additional topics of conversation we could have with Congressman Wenstrup, only have time for one, maybe two. I went with dealer's choice, and I gave him his option. And Dr. Congressman Wenstrup would like to talk about the COVID-19 origins. A little bit more. There's some more developments in the last couple of days, Congressman.
Yeah, what's come out in the last couple of days is how China, and particularly in Hubei province, where Wuhan is, they were ordering the PCR test. This is the test that can detect pathogens like COVID-19, right? So why in early 19 were they ordering so many of these tests to have available when the supposed COVID-19 just popped up late in 19, right? But let me just put some things out there.
They're just planning ahead, that's all.
Well, that's
just
the question.
Just exercising abundance of caution, Congressman. Now, there's nothing to see here.
But absolutely why? But Dr. Xi Zhengli, who's known as the Bat Lady and knows these bat viruses inside and out, she wrote an article with a Dr. Peng in January of 2019, said there's an increased probability of a coronavirus outbreak originating in China. I mean, she had been studying these. She had been in caves for 3 years. She's been culling these viruses from bat feces for 3 years. She also came out with an article in August of 19 saying, we just found one in some bats that I was studying from Singapore. It was another coronavirus. So she had a lab full of coronaviruses. So knowing that these bats existed in China and in Singapore, she talked about this coming up in China. So maybe that's why they bought these tests. But at the same time,
there was no bat to human transmission ever.
Right. So with COVID-19, you're exactly right. She didn't say when this may occur, but she did come out and say that the next one may come from China. So to your point, we've never found a bat to human transmission. The virus that they did have would take generations of variations within animals to get to the stage of what we see in COVID-19. And
mutations.
Yes. And
over time, mutations which would show up in the very bats that they test to see if any of them had coronavirus, specifically COVID-19. Did they find any single animal out there in the world that had COVID-19?
No.
Thank you.
And what we don't know, because they held this from us, Brian, you talk about animals having COVID-19, there's such a thing as called a humanized mouse. So you take humanized mice, you make them to mimic what a human response would look like.
Right.
That's what's done in the lab. So if they're genetically engineering, they would be testing this on a humanized mouse. We never got to see any data on any of that.
Oh, that's
okay. So they cut that off. So yeah, they tested thousands of animals, but they didn't test these mice that would have been in the lab.
Right.
And that evidence is destroyed or buried. And so, you have all these things that just so much point to this lab in China, or maybe if you want to use some semantics. It's now came out from the transcriptions we got from EcoHealth Alliance, who was funding the Wuhan lab with U.S. taxpayer dollars. And I know this gets very convoluted to the listeners, but what we're saying is U.S. taxpayer dollars were going to the Wuhan lab. And, from what they had so much within their works that they didn't really want any of this stuff to come out.
No kidding.
Because they were funding the lab.
Well, it's called smoking gun.
Many smoking guns along the way. And the only person that was allowed to go to China with the WHO is a man called Peter Daszak, who heads the EcoHealth Alliance. So he had a strong interest.
He was involved in gain-of-function research directly. You think he wants the world to know that his little operation had something to do with one of the worst pandemics that we've seen?
Yeah, whether it was funding it directly or fungibly funding it, right?
Money is fungible.
Money is fungible. And we know from articles in 2015, the U.S. had been engaged with this type of research. And a gentleman named Ralph Barrick from North Carolina was working with Dr. Shi Zhengli, who I already mentioned.
That lady.
On this type of 2-to-1 virus. You take two things, make it one, make it more infectious to humans. They were working on that. Their premise was if we make a virus that's super infectious and we can create the vaccine, then there's nothing we can't beat. I don't agree with that.
Well, guess what?
It created a danger.
Yeah, okay. Not only do you have that, did we get a vaccine that prevents this from happening? No, we didn't.
Yes.
We have one that maybe reduces the symptoms, but doesn't stop you from spreading and getting COVID-19.
I think it prevented many people the vaccine has prevented many people from getting it, but we know from the trials that a certain percentage that got the vaccine also got COVID. They didn't get as sick. So knowing that, and knowing that viruses can mutate,
flu virus,
create variants, why are we not working more on therapeutics? Why are we not working more on treatments? Like we have Tamiflu for the flu, right? We should be focused on that because we've known since the trials of the vaccines that even vaccinated people will get COVID. This thing's not going away.
No, it's not.
Face that reality. It's not going away. You can vaccinate every American. You're still going to have it around because there's going to be variants, and there are going to be people that get it and get sick. And so I'm for the vaccine. Don't get me wrong. I'm for the vaccine, but let's be realistic. We need therapeutics.
Therapeutics, no question about it. If you can keep people out of the hospital, isn't that really fundamentally where we're at?
Which the vaccine has done for a lot of people.
I'm not arguing that, but the idea, anything that keeps people out of the hospital, the big alarm bell that's been rung from the beginning is hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Now we're firing medical personnel who don't get the vaccine. 756, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you so much for your time spending with my listeners and me talking about these very important topics. I will look forward to our next encounter between now and then. Best of health to you and your family.
And you too.